This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
On Tuesday, the UN Security Council failed to agree on a resolution for an international investigation into Saturday's alleged chemical weapons attack in the town of Douma near Syria's capital Damascus. Russia vetoed the US drafted resolution, while the Russian drafted resolutions did not get the minimum votes to pass. US President Donald Trump has threatened to take forceful action in response to the attacks, while the Syrian government and Russia have said there is no evidence behind the claims. With the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, due to start its investigation in Syria shortly, what can we expect as the Syrian crisis spirals? What's at stake for a region already battered by war? Welcome to a special edition of The Point. I'm Lu Xin, and joining me for the discussion today are Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow. Here in the Beijing studio, we have Qinduo, Senior Fellow of the Pangoal Institution, and Einar, Tangen, current affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, Pavel, explain to us, please, what was the main difference between the two drafted resolutions by the United States and by Russia, respectively, and why was it so difficult for the world to agree on it?
Well, the American resolution basically wanted to restore the previously existing mechanism of figuring out, researching any kind of possible chemical use of chemical agents in Syria, and that because this previous one and the one that the Americans tabled, it wanted to create an independent, a fully independent investigating body, which could not only investigate was there a fact of a chemical use, but also could place blame. Because the OPCW can investigate was there a use or not, but it doesn't have the mandate to name the guilty party. So the Americans wanted an institution that could put the blame. Russia believed that that would mean that the Assad government would be targeted. And that's why Russia disagreed. Russia wanted to kind of have a, more or less what we have already, OPCW, which does not place blame, and that's how it's going to be. So that was the main difference. Can it, for this investigators, independent, place blame or not?
But what is the right procedure? Let me come to the two guests here in the studio, Einar and Qinduo. We know the OPCW conducted such investigation in the past, for instance, one that came to conclusion in April last year, and it did have the conclusion that chemical weapon was used in the attack in a place called Khan Sheikhoun. However, the OPCW did not come to the conclusion as to who was behind these attacks. Why does the United States want the OPCW to point finger this time, Einar?
Well, I think they want an independent body because they're concerned that they want to place blame. And the theory in the West that this is all due to the Assad government that is being backed by Russia. Russia's fear, on the other hand, is that this is a setup, that this is being put together by either rebels or the United States or powers that are hostile to it or Assad, and that any kind of pointing fingers is just simply a way of getting back at them. So you have two positions that don't trust each other, and this is why we're at literally at a standstill.
But, I mean, shouldn't we go and find out who is behind the attack, if there is one attack, of course?
Yes, I mean, on the surface, for ordinary folks, there's no problem. Either you follow the Russian basically resolution, or you follow the U.S.-sponsored resolution, find the fact, and then assign the blame. But I think there's a concern on the Russian side in the way that is justified. Before we know anything about this so-called chemical attack, if you look at the media coverage in the West, all the politicians from the West, including Donald Trump himself, basically they all point a finger at the Syrian government. Okay, hey, that's you who did it. And so even before any investigation, so that's a concern, you know, whether there will be a balanced investigation, whether the independent body will collect information not only from these, you know, wild helmets or activists or the rebel forces, but also sources, probably information from the Syrian government. Probably not, if it's independent over there.
So we're talking about 16 different events over the last few years involving chemical weapons. I mean, this is something very serious. There should be a way in which you can find out factually that these things were used, and supposedly the 16 confirmed occurrences. The question is, who is responsible and what is the game they're playing?
Mm-hmm. And some obvious questions here, and I want to ask Pavel, you are a seasoned defense analyst. Does it appear strange to you that the Syrian government would be using chemical weapons at this moment when they're already on the, you know, gaining advantage in this battle, in this war?
Well, I'm not in the brains of the Syrian generals and leaders in Damascus when they take decisions. I don't know. But you know, of course they have the upper hand in the fighting, but this is rather serious fighting. They're right now trying to storm and take very well entrenched positions. I mean, like in eastern Ghouta, where there were tunnels and bunkers. I mean, it was dug up and prepared for years for defense, and extracting seasoned defenders out of such reinforced positions is not an easy task. And sometimes, basically, chemical weapons could come very handy, and of course they cause also a psychological shock, and that could have been, so the military sense in using in such pitched battles for reinforced positions of chemical weapons, there is some military sense in that. Did they do it or not? I don't know, again, for sure, but some military sense could be seen there.
Why do you think the OPCW's current fact-finding mission is adequate or not adequate to establish first where the chemical weapon was used?
Well, there's apparently, from what's coming out of Douma, it was possibly use of chlorine gas, which is, of course, not real nerve agent. It was used by the Germans in 1915. It's not very effective, though apparently there it's a heavy gas, and it could penetrate into bunkers and dig-outs under buildings, and there it could have been sort of effective, though of course you need a lot of it. Will they find the residues? Most likely they will, or they will not. But that will take time. The mission has not yet went to Douma. Most likely it will take weeks for them to arrive, for the scene to be secured fully, because there's still some shooting there. They need a secure environment to work. Then it will take weeks more for them to produce some kind of official result. So if everyone's going to be waiting for their result, well, that's basically good, because there won't be a clash between Russian and American forces in Syria, because it's all going to be postponed.
So do you think it is a good idea or not for the OPCW to first go and find out whether chlorine gas was being used?
Well, that would be, of course, would give some cooling off for the present very tense situation when Donald Trump is kind of tweeting about that the American missiles will go through Russian defenses easily, and Russia replying that it will most likely use and retaliate if there's some kind of attack. The situation here in Moscow is seen as very tense, as a possibility, actually, a direct military confrontation, between American and Russian forces, or American and allied forces again, versus Russia and Syria and maybe Iran in the Middle East. That's a very dangerous situation. Getting a cooling off period would be most likely a good idea.
So, my two guests here in the studio, what do you think of what Pavel talked about, the making sense for the Syrian government to be using chlorine gas at this moment? Qinduo?
No, if you follow the logic, they are winning in the battle and in the war. There's no point basically using chemical weapons because they know if find out that they will be condemned, they will be basically even attacked by the U.S. forces and even French forces. The French president has talked about like attacking Syria, joining the Syria war a couple of weeks ago. And so what's the point of drawing more Western forces, hostile forces into the Syrian war? That's stupid. And also remember, President Trump has talked about pulling all the forces out of Syria. So is Syria President Assad that stupid? Yeah, and then you just gas your people and then ask the U.S. to stay? No, it doesn't make sense at all.
Einar, your take?
I'm going to agree with Pavel. I mean, when you're dealing in a war and you're dealing as a general and you're trying to capture something that's very difficult, you'll use all means possible. And I am convinced that chlorine gas, as he said, is a very heavy gas. It's not the most effective, but it is a good way of getting into tunnels and fortified locations. The issue here, though, is that the U.S. has taken on another kind of preemptive war. I mean, you see this with the trade negotiations, the trade tensions with China. You see this with Iran. You see this in almost every theater there is. In NAFTA, it doesn't matter if it's military or if it's economic. They're taking on this, we're going to fight everybody at the same time. And it's just incredible that they're doing this. And this is if Assad is making a calculation, he thinks the U.S. is overextended.
What I have a problem with is that immediately when news broke that there might have been some kind of chemical weapons attack, immediately all the big Western mainstream media started running footages of children being treated and panic and horror, children crying, screaming. The thing is, how can you tell from these footages that these are genuine footages, first of all, and secondly, that these children have really been subject of chemical gas attack? It's impossible to find. As much as I love children, I cannot just, from looking at these pictures and say,
well, you have, in some instances, it's not just pictures. What you do is you have face-to-face testimony with doctors who are in the hospital. They're obviously treating these children and things like that. I don't think there's any question that something happened. The question is, who was behind it?
Well, I don't think it's even clear that something happened because, again, the OPCW has yet to do their investigation. Simply by looking at the footages, for us laymen, it's impossible to tell.
No one has said that this is fake news. Whether they superimposed or used footage from the 16 other incidents is another issue. The fact is, something happened there, and I think even the Russians and Syrians they're saying that we were not responsible, that we didn't use it, that it could be somebody else. No one has denied that something happened there, or that these children were in the hospital and were suffering.
Well, I think from what I understood, there is a lot of doubt.
Well, at least all the information from the have made, like they are not. I would say they are not, should not consider as a reliable source of information because what happened in the past with they have a credibility issue. So even the careful media would say it's yet to be verified, and that's why we need to send OCPW to the ground and to find out if their chemical weapons were used and what kind of chemicals were used.
I think we should be paying attention to what Pavel said. The issue here is that you have two major powers that are facing off, and the greatest danger is this could ignite a real armed confrontation in the Middle East.
Of course, but again, Pavel, let me ask you this question before I go into the break. How genuine, how authentic did the video of children being, when people pour water over the head of children, trying to wash away something and putting inhaler as if, but these children looked fine. I mean, how did the video affect you? Did it look genuine?
No, well, I don't think that this case should be judged just by video footage. There should be more comprehensive investigation made, and chemical residue kind of gathered, and there should be, as I say, a cooling off period is essential right now on all sides. And if it's going to be a good investigation, let it be a good investigation. Problem is that, again, with investigation, there's also all the time the problem of credibility. Russia is saying that the United States is just looking for a pretext to attack. I'm not sure that Donald Trump really needs a pretext, or that wants a pretext to go deeper into Syria. But still, that's the situation that we all find ourselves in. We should not take as granted any kind of video as full evidence, but there should be a really comprehensive investigation. Better if it will be more independent. The more independent, the better it is.
We're going to take a very short break, and you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back, and we have been talking about the alleged chemical attack in Syria. Now, China abstained from voting on the U.S.-led proposal. On Tuesday, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Geng Shuang emphasized China's position on Syria as supporting a comprehensive, objective and impartial investigation into the incident based on scientific investigative method and solid evidence, and that parties should not make a prejudgment and jump to an arbitrary conclusion. The United States President Donald Trump, however, has threatened to use nice, new and smart missiles, and that they will be coming. So my guests here in the studio, Qinduo and Einar, why can't the West wait for the investigation to wrap up before talking about using missiles?
Well, I think for Donald Trump there's this desire to change the narrative in D.C. A weapons launch has in the past been very successful in moving his popularity ratings. And as we all know, currently he's very, very concerned about occurrences in the last 24 hours. His personal lawyer being subject to search and subpoena. Very, very serious situation. These ongoing Russiagate investigations, and also his personal problems with women that are suing him for sexual harassment, or alleging he has sexual harassment.
So basically he wants to use the Syria chemical attack story as a distraction from the other headlines.
It's quite possible. I mean, it's you have to start looking at what he's had, the economic kerfuffle that he started with China by these unilateral trade sanctions has not worked out the way he thought it would. He thought China would cave, that China had 500 billion at stake. He only had 150 billion, and therefore he could change it. But it hasn't turned out that way. So he may be searching for a new way of changing the narrative.
Qinduo.
Yeah, but also, remember on Monday, John Bolton started his new post as the National Security Advisor. He's known for being a hawk, very hawkish in terms of like Syria, in terms of the Middle East situation. Obviously, I would say he probably played a role in prompting President Trump to do something. Or this is, a very important issue. You should stay on in the White House and oversee any possible military operation over here.
Pavel, following on what Qinduo talked about, the role of John Bolton here, how do you see the Trump administration's narrative at this moment? You said a cooling period is necessary, but this is definitely not what we're hearing from the tweets of President Donald Trump. What has been shaping his policy here?
Oh, yeah, the change from McMaster to Bolton, I don't really think that that's going to really I mean, McMaster was also not a real dove at all. So it's not that there's a dove replaced by a hawk. And right now, most likely, Bolton is not only just, of course, taking over, but right now he has quite a job to put together some kind of coalition, because apparently the administration, not maybe Trump himself, but maybe he's also, of course, involved, building a broad coalition to go for Assad, not just America, but also France, Britain, most likely, regional powers, Jordan, the Gulf states, all together. Which, of course, makes actually a lot of political sense, but in the military, from the military point of view, that's much dangerous. Because the Americans can make a kind of swift attack just using cruise missiles. Okay, Russia shoots down several missiles together with the Syrians, but these are unmanned cruise missiles. If some go down, and some go down on their target, and some go down off target, it's more or less the same politically fallout. But to allow the allies to go into Syria, first have to wipe out the Russian-built, rebuilt Syrian air defense system. And Russia has spent 2 years rebuilding it, supplying new missiles, and their Russian advisors and specialists helping to run that system. And you have, for the Gulf state fighters and French and British to go in and not be shot down by that system, you have to wipe it out. And that could lead to Russian casualties, and we'll find ourselves in a much, much worse situation than we were ever in the last year or so.
Should we be concerned, Pavel, that this could really happen?
We should, yes, I believe should be concerned. Actually, the message coming right now from Moscow, from Russian officials, is that it's kind of going into a war situation between Russia and America. It's not most likely seen as that dire in Washington and the West, but that's the message coming in from Moscow, from Russian officials, the Russian media, that this is almost kind of we're on the brink of war. I mean, of course, brinkmanship. I mean, balancing on the brink of war, that's a seasoned tactic to achieve different kind of goals, including internal ones here in Moscow, between battles on defense spending between the so-called party of war and party of peace. But when you're balancing on the brink of war, sometimes your balance goes and you go down into the precipice of war. Yeah. And that's, of course, very concerning.
Okay, Einar, do you think that is a real possibility, that you know, the two blocs can really fire at each other?
Yes, I do. I mean, every major war has been predicated upon misunderstanding of brinksmanship, of this idea that they will back down. And Donald Trump is somebody who plays that game every day. He's playing it with China now. He's playing it with Russia. He's playing it with Mexico, with Canada, with Europe. I mean, there's just really, this is just the way that he does business. I don't think he understands that this is not situational bargaining. This is a statecraft. And statecraft doesn't go the same way. So yes, I do feel that there is a tremendous amount at stake here, and that we do not have the right person in the White House at this point to handle it. He's completely misunderstanding the situation. Russia is not going to give up Syria the same way the U.S. will not give up Israel.
Yeah, but Qinduo, what do you, I mean, I see the danger that, again, the United Nations or international law doesn't matter anymore. You know, whether the chemical weapon was really used doesn't matter, because, you know, right now the United States is talking about within 48 hours you have a coalition of the willing. You know, what is the danger in that?
That is the danger. It's about you know, whether you are mighty or not. It's the law of Django. You know, I would say Western countries, they often talk about like rules of law and a rules-based world. Why don't we keep this issue within the UN Security Council? Maybe, you know, 3 resolutions failed. What about the 4th one? What about the 5th one? Let's negotiate. Peace will be negotiated out instead of like you know, rhetorics like this of threatening against each other. Remember, both U.S. and Russia are nuclear powers. If we go down that path, that's really dangerous to the whole world.
What about the lesson from the Iraq War? I mean, the United States has stated with absolute certitude that there was weapons of mass destruction. In the end, it didn't happen. What's the likelihood that we have another Iraq happening in Syria? You know, chemical weapons happening, chemical weapons, and the Syrian government is behind it. You know, at the end, you find out later after, you know, the shots have been fired.
I mean, yes, that is a possibility. I mean, the fact that there have been 16 allegations, some of which have been proved through chemical residue, that there was, in fact, chemical weapons used. The issue there is who's doing it. Is it the Russian scenario where they think that Assad is being framed by either the rebels or the U.S., or is it the U.S. that this is Assad trying to break the back of his own people and that the Russians are aiding them? We don't know for certain on any of that stuff. My point is that this is not the reason that 2 superpowers should be facing off and threatening, as you have put out, the possibility of a nuclear war.
Well, just over a year ago, on April the 7th, 2017, the U.S. launched missile strikes against Syrian airbase from 2 Navy destroyers from after the Syrian government was alleged to have used chemical weapons. But the strikes did not seem to have weakened the Assad government. So, Pavel, what is different this time? Do you think the U.S. might deploy a similar tactic?
Well, apparently, from what's coming out of Washington, that they say that, yes, last time kind of pinpoint attack, one-time thing didn't work, so now we should go in more seriously, escalate, have a sort of air campaign of maybe several days, and really bombard the Syrian government assets so that they learn the lesson better. But there's a big danger there, because to do that, especially together with allies, and that's politically important that America doesn't go in alone, as I already said, you have to degrade the anti-aircraft capabilities there in Syria, and most likely including Russian capabilities that are deployed in, around Khmeimim and Tartus bases, and together with rather long-range anti-aircraft missiles and Russian crews manning them. And if you go into that, you're in a very kind of situation like in Vietnam or something else, when Americans bombed North Vietnam and there are Russians there. And right now Russia is saying that it won't tolerate attacks on its installations. So that's the real danger. I mean, they want to teach a lesson to Assad, but as a result, they're going on with Russia. And of course, actually, conventionally, Russia in the Middle East is much weaker than the United States and their allies. And yes, if it comes to a total showdown, most likely Russia will suffer a humiliating defeat, though maybe inflicting some casualties on the United States and its allies. But then what? Does Russia escalate and use nuclear weapons or what? We can get into a very bad situation. Most likely nothing like that happened during the Cold War. Then there were rules of engagement. Now apparently there are no rules.
Einar, I think still, do you think the possibility of nuclear weapons being used are real here?
Look, I mean, everyone says it won't happen. Right? That's what they said before the First World War. That's what they said before the Second World War. After the Second World War, everyone swore that there could never be another World War. The fact is, every weapon that has been developed by man has been used. And you're in a very, very dangerous position. I mean, Donald Trump is unpredictable. It's really very difficult what he's done. Putin is not somebody who's going to willingly back down. His whole demeanor is a tough guy who will do what is necessary to protect his country. He feels that the West betrayed him in terms of dismantling the USSR and then going in and deliberately provoking them by bringing in NATO and the EU. So yes, there is a danger that this could escalate. Remember, wars were started by the assassination of an archduke, which just seems so far-fetched
Qinduo,
today.
are you so pessimistic?
I would say, if you look at it from different angle, I don't think there's a good option for the Trump administration right now. They can repeat what happened last year, missile strike, that's it. But, if you follow Donald Trump's rhetoric, this is something much bigger than that. So what kind of a big operation than that? Then that would incite, obviously, retaliation from the Russian side. Their ambassador to Beirut had already said that they will fight back.
Right. Very sad and serious consequences. Anyway, we'll be keeping a close watch at the situation. Many thanks to my 3 guests here, and that is it for this special edition of The Point with Li Xin. Thank you for joining us. As usual, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.